Too Much Information is a production of iHeart Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Much Information, the show that brings you the secret histories and little-known fascinating facts and figures behind your favorite movies, music, TV shows, and more. We are your two senseis of scintilla, whatever. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh. That's a good one. You're really pulling these out. I was worried. You seem to be running low on
yeah, I
gas
got a
for
second
while on
win.
these.
I got a second win. I'm pounding the damn boards up here. I'm covered in flop sweat. Jordan, today we're going to be talking about the one and only bigger-than-life legend, Bruce Lee. You're going to have to do so many beeps in this because I just get so excited talking about Bruce Lee. As I think you have mentioned more than I have on the course of this show, I was a martial arts dork as a kid. I was bitten by the bug with my first episode of Power Rangers and was quickly enrolled at a local Taekwondo studio. And from there, spent probably 3 to 5 years just spending my weekly family movie night slot on martial arts movies. Made my family just watched Jean-Claude Van Damme, Jackie Chan especially. I love Jackie so much, and Bruce Lee. Jackie Chan, I think, is on a short list of the greatest living entertainers in the world. I have a real love for some of the JCVD stuff that's just clownish and ridiculous, but still sweet. And, you know, Bruce, man, like a warrior poet, just the closest thing we had to he's like if Michelangelo could kill you with your bare hands, just like a tremendously intelligent polymath who happened to be one of the greatest living martial artists. We won't be talking about Steven Seagal, though all of you should do a quick Google of his blues guitar because it's very funny. Jordan, we learned in the League of Their Own episode that you were a baseball guy in your youth, but tell me, did you have a martial arts moment as a weean?
Not really. I probably the most heteronormative thing that I've ever done was get into Power Rangers for a few months in 1995. And this was a very brief period, but it was during Halloween. So somewhere out there are photos of me dressed as the Red Ranger. But then just as quickly as this fixation came, I kind of got over it. And that's kind of all I got. I can't really bluff this one. I don't really have any background in the martial arts or know anything about the movies associated with it. But I am really interested in Bruce Lee just as a historical figure. I mean, for me, he's like Muhammad Ali, just so endlessly fascinating, even if I know very little about the finer points of their sport. I mean, just, you said warrior poet. His quotes alone are just so intriguing. You know, I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times. And, you know, of course, there's the great iconoclastic credo, I'm not in this world to live up to your expectations, and you're not in this world to live up to mine. I mean, the man was a quote machine. And just, he's so much more than a fighter. You're absolutely right. And we'll touch on this in the episode, but there was this time in his life when he was recovering from a back injury, and he wrote a philosophy book, basically. It was published after his death. And he just to hear his thoughts on things. It's so fascinating. There's this amazing ESPN 30 for 30 documentary that came out in 2020 called Be Water, which takes its title from his famous, philosophy about how to fight. Basically, I mean, not even just fighting, how to just live, really.
Yeah, how to move through the world.
Yeah, how to go with the flow. And there's also 2012's I Am Bruce Lee, which features Ed O'Neill of Married with Children fame. I was shocked to discover that Ed Bundy actually has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
That's sick.
I have a question for you. Does one have a black belt, or is one a black belt? I never understood.
Much like Schrodinger's cat, it's both at the same time. You live in a constant state of superimposition between having and being.
Okay.
Go on.
Yes. As befits my sort of ghoulish tendencies, which I really haven't displayed very much on this show, but I'm sure they'll come out.
They're coming out. Dribs and drabs.
Yeah. Aside from Bruce Lee's incredibly graceful athleticism, I'm also drawn to him due to the murky circumstances of his death, with all the rumors of him being killed by, the Triad Gang and all sorts of other theories. So that's interesting to me, too. I know we'll probably get into that in this episode, too.
Oh, we will ever. Lee's second film, Fist of Fury, 50 years old this year. And I mean, obviously, Enter the Dragon is the bigger one in the popular consciousness, but this film is really interesting as a waypoint in his career for reasons we'll get into later. And, I couldn't wait until 2023 to talk about Bruce. So, from his apparent insistence on fighting anyone, anywhere, at any time, at the drop of a hat, to the fact that this movie made Chairman Mao cry, to the fact that it was dubbed into an Australian indigenous dialect just this last year. Here's everything that you didn't know about Fist of Fury. Bruce Lee was born the son of Grace Ho and Lee Hoi Chuen, a Cantonese opera star based in Hong Kong, although Bruce was born in San Francisco in 1940 while his parents were visiting the city for a concert tour by his dad. Fun fact, the family's youngest son, Robert Lee, would follow in his dad's footsteps, making a living with his voice, not his fists. He got famous in Hong Kong during the 1960s as the lead singer and founder of a band, the Thunderbirds. So between his dad's celebrity and the fact that Grace's family were one of the wealthiest and most powerful clans in Hong Kong at the time, Bruce had a relatively comfortable childhood growing up, notwithstanding the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong, which we will also get to later.
He was born in 1940, which, according to the Chinese zodiac, is the year of the dragon. And he was also born in the hour of the dragon, which is, according to my research, between 7 and 9 in the morning, which I know is 2 hours. And this is seen as extremely good luck to be born in both the year and the hour of the dragon. And people who are so blessed are supposed to be able to overcome any obstacle, which Bruce demonstrated again and again on film. He was nicknamed the Little Dragon as a boy.
Yeah, there's a pretty good biopic of him from 1994 called Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, which was written and directed by Rob Cohen, who is the auteur behind Fast and the Furious and Triple X. It has a really fascinating aspect of his early life. For the first 2 years of Bruce's life, his parents had dressed him and passed him off as a girl to protect him from this Chinese superstition that demons target the firstborn son in any family.
But that is interesting because her first child was a boy who was stillborn. Which I guess she attributed to these spirits, so hence why she wanted to protect Bruce. So, I mean, in a way, that horrible prophecy came true.
So in the movie, Cohen literalizes this with a recurring dream sequence in which Bruce fights a giant samurai demon that he eventually chokes to death with a pair of nunchucks. It rules, and I cannot stress that enough. So anyway, when Cohen met Bruce's widow, Linda Lee Caldwell, after he had given her the screenplay, she asks him, "How did you know about Bruce's demon?" Which is a weird thing to ask. Those two had such a pure relationship. They were married in secret in August of 1964 because this horrifying hellhole of a country still had anti-miscegenation laws on the books.
And her dad was a very strict Southern Baptist, I believe. And I guess was very against their union. But he eventually came around because he's Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
Your son-in-law is Bruce Lee. How cool is that?
Lee.
Yeah.
So Cohen explains to her, this is just a thing I did for the movie. This is a dramatic device. And she tells him...
This is the demon?
Yeah, the giant samurai demon played by Sven-Ole Thorsen. And so she's like, oh, well, Bruce told me the first time he collapsed, 10 weeks before his actual death, he felt like he was being stalked by a demon that was trying to pull him away.
Wow.
So that is spooky.
Yes. We should probably touch a little more on his actual death. Because it's shrouded in so much mystery. I mean, it's just so strange to me that this incredibly physically fit person died at age, 32?
32, cerebral edema, right?
Yes. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of theories as to why this happened. I mean, there's one that says that he just had an allergic reaction to basically like an aspirin, some really standard run-of-the-mill over-the-counter medication. Another said that it might have been something to do with heat exhaustion, because I guess the first time he collapsed, he was in a small room on a really hot day doing voiceovers, and he turned the AC off so that it wouldn't affect the sound quality from his recording, which coincidentally is exactly what I'm doing right now. And I'm terrified. And so there's theories that heat stroke had something to do with his death. But there are also all these theories that his death was something a little more sinister. We mentioned the theories about gang killings at the top of the episode. Bruce supposedly made a lot of enemies during his life by teaching kung fu to Westerners, and traditionally it was supposed to be only taught to the Chinese.
Mhm.
And so there's this theory that he was killed sort of for revenge for betraying the secrets of this martial art.
Yeah, there's this other bit of oral legend lore, if you want to call it that, about this technique called the dim mak, or the death touch, which is also in Bloodsport and Kill Bill Part 2. You know, when she kills David Carradine at the end, the 5-point palm heart exploding technique. The dim mak is this legend, martial arts legend, where if you hit people in a certain order at these pressure points on their body, they will walk away fine, but within a certain amount of time, they will die spontaneously. And in Kill Bill, it's 5 steps. And the supposed theory behind the Bruce Lee thing is that at one point, somebody did this to him, unbeknownst to him.
Because in real life, it can sometimes be days and weeks later, right?
I don't know if this is an actual thing,
okay,
but
right.
this is the legend. It's cool. So Bruce's early martial arts training feeds into what he would call Jeet Kune Do,
Which translates roughly to the way of intercepting fist, which rules.
Yeah, it's it's less of a system than an approach. It's basically like, hey, if you're a fighter or you're a martial artist, or really if you're any kind of artist, you should not feel constrained by borders. You should take whatever elements of any other system that you like and incorporate it into your own thing. And this has been thought of as basically a precursor to modern MMA, just combining striking and grappling and all of these disparate forms into one system. And it's interesting that he basically got that because as a kid, as this child actor, he was trained in all kinds of stuff. He was trained in Wing Chun under the founder of the modern system of that style, a guy named Ip Man, Tai Chi, boxing. He was a dancer. And he also was just constantly getting in street fights in Hong Kong, fighting with other martial artists, other students, American sailors. And he whipped so much ass that he was not doing well in school, and his family was basically like, I think that the 2 stories that I've heard is that he really injured a kid, and the other one was that he may have beat up somebody who was tied to the triads, which were the organized crime in Hong Kong. And he was not doing well in school, and he had this dual citizenship because he was born in San Francisco, and his family were like, we are getting you out of the country.
He apparently had this fighter's instinct in him from a young age. I read that he pulled a knife on a gym teacher in school.
Who among us?
Right, yes. But the secondary aim of his relocation to the United States in 1959 was to claim his U.S. citizenship that he was entitled to because he was born in San Francisco. And I guess you have to get that all wrapped up and get all the paperwork submitted before you're 18 in order to do that. It's interesting that the name that he went by as a boy was Li Jun Fan, which translates roughly to return and prosper. And some say that his mother hoped for him to return to the U.S. and become successful. One of my favorite facts about Bruce Lee is that his early job in the United States was as a ballroom dance instructor.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. I guess he traded martial arts lessons for dance lessons when he was living in Hong Kong, and even won the Crown Colony Cha-Cha Championship. And I guess there's like pictures of him in like a button-down shirt and a bow tie with like a pompadour holding this trophy. It's so great. And if you visit the Hong Kong Heritage Museum, you'll find among Lee's featured possessions a notebook containing over 100 cha-cha steps. So great. But Bruce's relationship to the United States is so fascinating to me. Did you know he was apparently circumcised at age 22 to seem more American?
I sure didn't.
Yes. This is per the book Bruce Lee, A Life by Matthew Polly. I guess when his brother Robert, the aforementioned singer, asked Bruce, hey, why'd you do that? Bruce replied, it's what they do in America. I'm American. I want to look the part.
Good Lord.
Really went for it.
Yeah. So we mentioned Bruce was a hoofer, a real Broadway Danny Rose kind of guy. And this was largely because of his dad. He was a child. He was like Jackie Coogan. He was a child star in Hong Kong. His first role was as a literal baby, carried on stage in the film Golden Gate Girl in 1941. His first leading role alongside his dad 9 years later in a movie called The Kid. By the time he was 18, he'd been in 20 films. This media training, I guess you could call it, really gave him that sense of poise and presence that is just so central to his iconography. Just I remember seeing an interview where he was talking about Steve McQueen, and he talks about, Steve McQueen had that thing where you just walk into a room and turn it on, and it was just like light would bend around him. And Bruce has that in the movies, man. Like they just do all those snap zooms to him on like when he walks in the door of the dojo or whatever, and it's just like, yup, this man is about to destroy the entire room with his presence alone. Yeah, great.
Another fact about Bruce Lee that just absolutely blows my mind. I mean, he's one of the most athletic, physically perfect human beings of all time.
Right.
Not good enough for the United States military. He failed his draft physical. The Army classified him 4F due to some combination, I've seen a bunch of reasons cited, of an undescended testicle, poor eyesight, a sinus disorder, and one leg being longer than the other. Presumably his kicking leg.
Yeah, that's my strong leg.
Yeah. I mean, to which I say, the Army's loss.
Yeah, right. Man,
could have sorted out Saigon in 6 months.
I learned way more about Bruce Lee's junk in this episode than I thought I was going to be.
Oh, yeah, there you go. I'm glad I could teach you something. I know, you were the Bruce Lee expert. I'm really glad I was able to teach you this.
As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages. So in 1964, Lee had lived in Washington State before settling in Oakland. He has a tremendous tie to Oakland and San Francisco. He had a long-running martial arts school in Oakland. 1964, one of the big defining moments of his life occurs. Ed Parker, who is the founder of the American Kenpo karate system, and yes, it must be said, Elvis Presley's karate teacher.
Yes.
Invites him to something called the Long Beach Karate Championships in 1964, International Karate Championships. And it is at this event that some of the modern building blocks of his myth are seen in the public. 2-finger push-ups and the famous 1-inch punch. The former is self-explanatory, but the latter is crazy. You have seen this on screen in Kill Bill Part 2. This is the move that Beatrice, Uma Thurman's character, learns from Pai Mei that she uses to pound her way out of the coffin that she's buried into that awesome Ennio Morricone score. You basically extend your fingertips and put your middle finger, your longest finger, at whatever you're trying to hit, and then without retracting your arm for the punch, you push forward, you throw a punch. It looks like the Doctor Strange thing where he astrally punches the guy's soul out of his body when Lee does this. I don't think the 64 one is filmed, but in 1967 it is. And he does this, and the guy
looks
is
supernatural.
Yeah, he's just sent sprawling backwards.
I read he flew back 16 feet is the figure that I read. I mean, it's just and again, the thing that's amazing about this is that his arm is not drawn back. It's forward an inch and a half, maybe 2 at most. There's
so great.
There's no wind up. It's just pure muscular force.
That 1967 footage is incredible. It's some of the only footage that you can see of him sparring in a non-choreographed setting. First of all, he does a thing where he's blindfolded and fighting a guy, which is just doing the Wing Chun style.
How does one do that? I don't understand.
Wing Chun is actually really interesting. It was invented, they think it was invented for women as a form of self-defense. And so consequently, a lot of it is not really based on like these big demonstrative kicks or throws. It's all very close quarters. And they do this, there's a system or practice in there called sticky hands, where you're keeping your wrists and hands in contact with the person that you're sparring with. And you're supposed to be able to counter and attack and anticipate all of their moves with just that physical contact. But there's a point which he's doing this with this guy where all of a sudden he just sweeps this dude's leg. It's just like, how did you have the kinesthetic awareness to do that? Then when he's sparring this other guy, it literally looks like the other man is running at half speed. Like he is just so ungodly fast. There's another part where he's standing like 3 feet away from a guy and throws a front hand like back fist. And the dude goes to parry it like a full half second too late and just bursts out laughing like, well, that dude's in another universe from me. Anyway.
So in the audience at this 1964 event is a guy by the name of Jay Sebring, who at the time was a very famous celebrity hairstylist, probably most famous for his relationship with Sharon Tate, whom he was dating at the time. They remained friends even after they broke up, and he would be murdered while trying to defend Sharon by the Manson family in 1969. But Jay was something of a martial arts aficionado, and a very early martial arts aficionado, I should think. And he was incredibly taken with Bruce Lee and actually started to work with him. And he obtained a demonstration tape that Bruce had made. And he was so impressed with this that he gave it to his friend, a TV producer named William Dozier.
Yeah, and so Dozier, I think, gets Lee to audition for a pilot that is filmed but not picked up. But he also happens to narrate the Green Hornet TV series. And so Lee is cast as Kato for all 26 episodes of that show's paltry one-season run. And that breaks him to U.S. audiences. But it doesn't only break him to U.S. audiences, it essentially breaks authentic Chinese martial arts to Western audiences. This is in 64, so you think about the whole history of Westerns, and it is just this ungodly, clumsy...
It's lumbering around like gorillas.
Yeah, like toddlers throwing these big haymakers and wrestling around in the mud. And producers wanted Lee to fight like that in the show, and he wisely was like, no, I will not. So this is the first exposure American audiences really had to this style of fighting. And my favorite thing about this is that he was moving too fast for the cameras when he first started doing this. And they were like,
of course.
They were like, you got to slow it down, man. And so he did. He had to run all of his stuff slower than he actually could so that it wouldn't just be filmed as an unrecognizable blur. It's just amazing to me. They also appear on episodes of Batman, which is great. There's a Batman Green Hornet crossover.
That, right?
Yep. And so based on this kind of stuff, a couple other bit parts, he's in Ironsides, a detective in a wheelchair show. He's got different stuff popping up here and there. And he's also teaching. Two of his students are this writer Sterling Siliphant and the actors James Coburn and Steve McQueen. And so he's getting these bit parts. And crucially to this next part we're going to talk about, in 1969, he is credited as the karate advisor in The Wrecking Crew, which is the fourth installment of a comedy sci-fi film starring Dean Martin.
Which also went on to influence the Austin Powers series. But yeah, Bruce Lee was tight with a lot of A-listers. Speaking of Dino and the Rat Pack, Bruce supposedly once kicked a door off its hinges to impress Frank Sinatra.
Hell yes.
Which I love. This is the rumor that went around Hollywood. I'm not totally sure if it's true, but the story went around and made him extremely popular. He turned McQueen on to various martial arts. McQueen turned him on to marijuana, which morphed into a chewable Nepalese hash, which he became very fond of. I guess traces of that were found in his stomach at his autopsy. And for a while, the authorities were like, maybe that killed him. Like, yeah, that's not how that works. After Bruce's death, pallbearers at his funeral included McQueen, who wore a denim jacket over his black tie. He looks like he's doing a Levi's ad with Bruce Lee's coffin on his shoulder. The pictures from it are insane. Other very famous pallbearers at Bruce Lee's funeral include James Coburn and the one-time James Bond, George Lazenby, who was in 1969's On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
That's so cute that they had a relationship. This is now getting into Once Upon a Time in Hollywood territory, which I'm going to try not to get too furious at, but it's a big digression, and I think it's just crazy, so it's just fun to talk about. Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate both studied with Lee. I think Lee was making something like $1,000 an hour to teach Roman Polanski martial arts, and Roman would fly him to Switzerland to train. And Tate studies with him in preparation for her role in The Wrecking Crew, which is the movie she goes to see herself in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So, after she gets murdered by the Manson family, Polanski initially suspected that Lee did it, A, because he was the most dangerous person that Polanski knew at the time, and B, because they found a pair of glasses at the scene of the murder. And during a lesson with him months later, Bruce offhandedly mentions that he lost his glasses. So Roman Polanski conducts this ham-handed PI-esque scheme. He goes, "Oh, Bruce, why don't I take you to my optician and we'll get you fitted for some new ones?" He thinks craftily. And
stroking his non-existent beard.
And so he goes to they go to the optician, and Bruce reads off his prescription to the guy, and Polanski goes, foiled again. I don't know.
Because it didn't
Yes,
match
they did,
it didn't
yes.
match the prescription found at the crime scene.
And unsurprisingly, you have quite a bit to say about these glasses.
Yeah, one of my obsessions, there's the Titanic, there's the Beatles, there's James Bond, and there's also the Manson murder. And so please shut me up if I start rambling a little too much. But yeah, Roman kind of understandably drove himself insane in the wake of Sharon's death, and he did a great deal of this amateur sleuthing. He'd had an affair with Michelle Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas, who at that time was still married to John Phillips, also of the Mamas and the Papas. And so Roman thought for a long time that John Phillips was behind Sharon's murder, sort of as revenge for this affair, because it had been found out. So one day he sneaks into John Phillips's garage and dusts his Rolls Royce with some solution that he'd obtained from the cops that reacted to traces of blood. So he's trying to see if there are any evidence that could be found on John Phillips's car. Obviously, he found nothing. He also studied the handwriting of his friends to see if any of their writing matched the word pig that had been scrawled on his front door in Sharon's blood. And an interesting note about these glasses that were found at the crime scene, no one to this day really knows why they're there. Like, it was really this kind of outlier in all the evidence that was gathered at the Polanski house. Just these big horn-rimmed glasses, didn't belong to any of the known killers who were there. And there's a theory that's been taking hold in recent years that, because Charles Manson didn't actually officially go to the crime scene. He ordered his followers to go up there and sort of do his biddings for him. But there's this theory that he, hours after the murders, went up there with another member of the family to basically survey the crime scene and stage it to his liking, to just sort of arrange the scene with the bodies. Because I guess hours and hours and hours after the killers left, people in the area, neighbors, heard two men arguing. And if they look at the blood trace map at the property, it looks like the bodies have been dragged around and moved. So there's this theory that Manson went up there and possibly deposited these glasses just to throw off the authorities, to just leave this random clue that didn't actually fit, to try to just throw people off. Yeah, and to this day, no one actually knows why they're there. Which is very interesting to me. Going back to Bruce Lee, he apparently made a point of wearing these old taped up Coke bottle glasses as a way of reminding himself of where he came from and to stay grounded.
I love that. So by 1970, he's choreographing the fights in an Ingrid Bergman movie, which I love because there's no degree of separation between Ingrid Bergman and Bruce Lee. But that year, he damages a sacral nerve in his lower back. Weightlifting, he's laid up for a few months in bed, which is when you mentioned he wrote his book. And money was so tight at this point because he couldn't work that Linda actually starts moonlighting at an answering service, pulling double duties to make ends meet for their family.
I love their relationship so much.
Yeah.
Their love just sustains me. The pictures of Bruce and his wife Linda together are just some of the most pure images of coupledom that I've ever seen. I know it sounds like he's had a number of affairs. I will choose to ignore them. There's this famous quote of his. I don't know if it's from a movie or from his notebooks of poetry that he wrote, but I always thought it was really beautiful. Love is like a friendship caught on fire. In the beginning a flame, very pretty, often hot and fierce, but still only light and flickering. As love grows older, our hearts mature, and our love becomes as coals, deep burning and unquenchable. This guy can do it all. This guy
yeah, that's beautiful.
has such a beautiful blend of spiritual and physical grace. It's amazing.
And so this is the era when he decides to is influenced to move back to Hong Kong. And this is also gets into the drama around the television show Kung Fu. Starts in 1972, stars David Carradine as this sort of Clint Eastwood-esque wandering martial artist. And the drama is that in 1971, Bruce pitched a TV show with the title The Warrior. That has been confirmed by Warner Brothers, that they took this meeting. And then in his lone English-speaking TV interview, which is in Canada on the Pierre Berton show, he talks about pitching this show, and he says that their vision for him was to be in a modernized type of thing because they think the Western is out. But then he says, whereas I wanted to do a Western. Now, according to Linda, this is the idea that does become Kung Fu, and he got screwed out of a credit. Warner Brothers' excuse is that they had for some time been developing the same idea. And they were just like, oh, synchronicity. Oh, and they also said that he was not cast in Kung Fu regardless of who developed the idea because his accent was too thick or just because of good old-fashioned American racism. But he was admirably pragmatic about the circumstances of this, telling Pierre Burton that they think that business-wise it is a risk. He says, I don't blame them. If the situation were reversed and an American star were to come to Hong Kong and I was the man with the money, I would have my own concerns as to whether or not the acceptance would be there. So that's enlightened of him. I'd be pissed as hell, especially after I see David Carradine sleepwalking his way through all of those fight scenes. So then a guy named Fred Weintraub, who's the original owner and host at the Bitter End in Greenwich Village, New York, and who helped fund the Woodstock documentary, he is involved in developing Kung Fu, and he gives Bruce the advice that, hey, you should go over to Hong Kong, make some movies, and then come back with those on your resume, on your CV into Hollywood.
That sounds suspicious to me. Like, hey, we stole your idea. Why don't you go to leave the country and come back while we make it? Yeah.
But the cool thing is that unbeknownst to Lee at this point, the Green Hornet has become a huge hit in Hong Kong. It is renamed The Kato Show and made him an enormous celebrity. Weintraub said in 2013 that you just couldn't walk the streets of Hong Kong without having 500 people follow you. So, next. Without getting too granular about the history of Hong Kong martial arts cinema, he said, proceeding to do just that. The two big players from this era are the Shaw Brothers and Raymond Chow's Golden Harvest. The Shaw Brothers are hugely influential in having Kung Fu cinema cross over into the United States and international. They made 1,000 films, and you will recognize some of these titles, stuff like The Five Deadly Venoms and The Five Fingers of Death, from just infiltrating pop culture because they were huge hits on the midnight movies, grindhouse, exploitation circuit. And that's where people like Quentin Tarantino and the RZA saw them. RZA has talked about coming into Staten Island to see all of these Kung Fu movies in Times Square. And the Wu Tang record, Enter the 36 Chambers, takes its title from a Shaw Brothers film. They obviously have all those little bits of dialogue, sampling the film that are interspersed into their songs. Just a hugely influential thing for him. And in Kill Bill, not the first or last time I'll be bringing this up, in Kill Bill, Pai Mei, the guy with the tremendous eyebrows and white beard who trains Uma, that is Gordon Liu, who is a big Shaw Brothers star, who is actually in the 36th Chamber movie. Pivoting over to Golden Harvest, Raymond Chow, who was a martial artist, launched basically every big star in the last 50 years of Kung Fu cinema, Jackie Chan, Jet Li, Donnie Yen. And the rivalry between those two studios is like Disney grade. Because Golden Harvest was founded by Raymond Chow and a guy named Leonard Ho, who had both been executives with the Shaw Brothers, and they defected. And they wanted to have a studio that was going to be the opposite of the Shaw Brothers, which was this assembly line, really quality controlled, bang them out system. And so they basically said, we're going to pay people more and give them more creative freedom. And that was how they were going to run their studio. So Bruce asks a childhood friend of his, who he had co-starred in these films alongside with the absolutely remarkable name of Unicorn Chan, to pass his CV to the Shaws. And they are interested, but they lowball him. They offer him a long-term contract at something like $2,000 a film. And considering he'd been making $1,000 an hour to teach karate, $2,000 a film is pennies. And he declines. Chow hears of this meeting and decides to take a meeting with Bruce and offers him a 2-picture deal, the first of which is The Big Boss. Lee did not enjoy making The Big Boss. It was filmed in Thailand, and he wrote to Linda complaining the food was terrible, he was losing weight, he lost his voice, trying to shout above the noise that was on the set. There were mosquitoes and cockroaches everywhere. The tap water in the hotel was yellow. He injures himself badly making this. He cuts his hand. You can see like a plaster bandage on it. He sprains his ankle. That's why he's like limping, half dead by the last scene. And he loses his contact lens at one point, which holds up the scene for hours.
The sight of Bruce Lee screaming, "Nobody move!" Like on the balls of his feet, like feeling around. Didn't he also get bitten by a cobra while filming a scene for that?
I believe it.
I love that how, by all accounts, whenever he got injured, in the middle of a take, he insisted that the crew not stop filming until the scene was completed. And it was only after that he would seek medical attention. Guy's a pro.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of behind the scenes drama in this movie. They started shooting it with a 3-page script, which gave him a lot of leeway to kind of bully his way through the film. He clashed with the first director over the choreography. To understand about what was happening at this time, you have to know a little bit about a subgenre of martial arts movies called wuxia. This was really popular at the time. This was big Shaw Brothers stuff. There are movies that take place in Chinese antiquity, often starring lightly fictionalized versions of real life, historical, military, folk heroes. And all the choreography in them is very fanciful, and it's where you get the wire work. It's where you get people doing like crazy backflips and flying through air. Very flowing and artsy fight scenes. The biggest example of this for Western audiences is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I mean, that looked so alien to us, having people like do these balletic fight scenes 50 feet up in the air. But that would have been very standard for Chinese movie-going audiences because of the history of this genre. Now, those are the fight scenes that this director, Wu Chia-xiang, wanted. Bruce, who, as you remember, beat half of Hong Kong to death with his bare hands, wanted these street fight style scenes that would be more realistic. They'd be brutal, direct, realistic. They fought. Each one of them wanted the other one fired, and Golden Harvest crunched the numbers, decided they had just paid Lee more recently, and fired the director. He also clashes with the film's build star, James Tien, who was a bigger deal than Lee at the time, but Lee kind of edges him out during the production and writing process, probably because people just looked at the dailies and were like, "Oh, this is what we have on our
Film
hands."
that.
Yeah.
Point the camera at that.
Yeah. And lastly, the Shaw Brothers were also making a movie in Thailand and apparently still going around behind Golden Harvest's back trying to sign Lee to a new contract. But whatever the drama, the film is a huge hit when it comes out. It grosses an adjusted $300 million worldwide on a budget of $100 grand. Talk about an ROI. It is the highest grossing Hong Kong film up until Lee's next film, Fist of Fury. And this might have been why he decided to form his own production company. There's a book written by a guy who worked with him on Enter the Dragon and Way of the Dragon that he said Bruce told him that Chow only gave him 5% of the profits from those two films, which it made almost like $500 million, and he got 5% of them. So we get to Fist of Fury. The plot of this movie is fairly straightforward and one that is familiar to any martial arts movie fan. Lee is playing a guy named Chen Zhen, and his teacher has died under mysterious circumstances, and he goes to Japan to investigate. Pretty simple setup with a lot of subtext. Chen's teacher in the film shares a name with a real-life figure named Huo Yanjia, who dates back to the Qing dynasty in China and is something of a real-life folk hero in China. He was seen as defending the Chinese national identity and being very proud of this identity at a time when it was under threat from influences from Europe and Japan. So, consequently, in this movie, the Japanese are portrayed as extremely villainous. The Japanese villains use this term, sick man of Asia, to refer to the Chinese. I wikied this. It has a long,
Yes, it does.
deep history of use as an insult in Asia. I'm not getting into it. I'm sure I will say something wrong, but it is very insulting. So that was written in on purpose. And there's also a point where Bruce kicks apart a sign that says no Chinese or dogs allowed. So the plot of this movie about this honorable, pacifistic man being forced into violence and conducting a one-man war against a foreign enemy that he did not want to fight, very pointed for the Chinese. And especially for Lee. Very quick history lesson. The Japanese invasion of a bunch of territories, including Hong Kong, starts in December of 1941, concurrently with Pearl Harbor, right? Lee's dad was nearly killed when he was at a buddy's house and it was bombed as part of the occupation. So Lee's dad nearly died. And Linda tells the story of Lee as a little kid, like sitting out and watching the Japanese planes flying overhead and shaking his fist at them, which is tragic and adorable. So this is all this anti-colonialism, pro-Chinese nationalism sentiment, defending against the Japanese. This is really kind of transcends the genre, deeply personal stuff for him. And This particular strain of nationalism found a fan in another big figure in Chinese history, Chairman Mao. Chairman Mao, everyone, making his first appearance on the podcast.
Friend of the pod,
Friend
new
of the
friend of the
pod.
pod, Chairman Mao.
So by 1974, Mao has been diagnosed with a cataract, and Lee is dead at this point.
Mao had nothing to do with that, by the way.
Yeah,
Despite the many people he killed, not this one.
that's just to cover our bases there. He is diagnosed with a cataract, and his doctors say you got to quit reading so much. So he turns to movies. He goes through a couple foreign biopics of figures like Abe Lincoln and Napoleon. And then his deputy minister of the Ministry of Culture, Liu Qingtang, gets him a bunch of Hong Kong kung fu flicks. And Lee was a really unknown quantity in China because of the country's self-imposed cultural isolation. So this was the first time that Chairman Mao was seeing any of these. And he burst into tears watching Fist of Fury for the first time and cried Bruce Lee as a hero. And then watched it 2 more times, a personal record for his film viewing that Liu said stood for the rest of his life.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment.
Random bits about the film. This is the first one in which his iconic nunchuck routine makes an appearance. He had used them on the Green Hornet before, but this is the first time when the film just grinds to a halt to watch Bruce Lee whip around nunchucks faster than the speed of sound.
Also, supposedly, I guess production had to contend with local street gangs demanding payment for using their territory.
Yeah.
And as the path of least resistance, the producers paid up, although Lee was predictably very upset about this and wanted to fight all of them, presumably at once. And could he have taken them? Probably.
Yeah.
Did you know that for his total lack of fear of human beings, as evidenced by this anecdote, Bruce Lee was terrified of swimming pools?
I sure didn't.
You did not? I guess when he was a little boy, he pushed his younger sister into the pool, and she retaliated by holding his head underwater. And it traumatized him so much that he never set foot in the pool again.
That's wild.
And now we are so thrilled to speak about one of your heroes. You mentioned him at the top of the episode, Jackie Chan, who, I mean, I know through conversations we've had, you've likened to Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton.
He's them plus Bruce Lee. I mean, it's funny because I'll talk about this in a few minutes, but he was basically explicitly positioned as Bruce Lee's heir. But the crucial difference between them is that Jackie was schooled at a performing arts school that really pushed for comedy and
singing, right?
Yep, he's a singer and stage comedy. And so even though all of his early films, he's playing this very straight-laced, just sort of Bruce Lee-esque badass, he quickly figures out that I am also a tremendously gifted physical comedian. And that's when you just get that tremendous run of 80s stuff like Armor of God and Super Cop, all this stuff where it's just, yeah, man. I mean, he would beat the shit out of someone with a ladder and then hurl himself down a pole covered with light bulbs, popping them on the way. It's just what more? Come on, man. Talk about flop sweat. That man broke his body to give us joy. Anyway, but he's also in Enter the Dragon. He tells this really funny anecdote about he took a punch from Bruce Lee and he would overplay how much it hurt him because then Bruce would go over and comfort him and talk to him. And Jackie says he just liked being held by him.
Oh. You mentioned that in Jackie Chan's autobiography, he saw an actual fight on the set.
Well, an almost set. I guess
almost fight.
Yeah, so in his autobiography, Jackie Chan's autobiography, he talks about the tension between Bruce and Lo got so bad that they almost blossomed into a fight. And he mentions the incredibly emasculating detail that the director hid behind his wife, using her as a human shield between himself and the deadliest man of all time. And this woman calmed Lee down and broke up the fight. Oh, that guy sounds like a piece of shit. I'm being chased by a man who can punch faster than the speed of sound. Where is my wife? To throw, was his child not on hand? Could he not just hold his baby up in front of him? Good Lord. This thing was filmed in 6 weeks.
Wow.
That's how he was able to make like 4 of these in the 2 years he was an international celebrity before he died, because they just cranked these things out. Spoilers. The film ends with a very Butch and Sundance, Harder They Come, Vanishing Point ending, where there's a freeze frame where he launches into this flying kick at a row of armed policemen and military. And there's a sound of gunfire, the implication, of course, that he has died. And this was a point that Lo Wei and Bruce wanted to make about him sort of honorably paying for sinking to the Japanese level in this. I mean, I was reading about this, someone was like, he's basically a serial killer in this movie. He just like goes around just murdering people. So they had to end this with this kind of morality play where he, and Lo says this to him, Lo is playing the police inspector in this film, and he says, to uphold your master's honor, which you have tainted with this international killing spree you have gone on to, you have to surrender, you have to give yourself up. And to have their cake and eat it too, they had him sort of give himself up via a flying kick. Anyway, that's all just very funny, niche Chinese cultural stuff to me that's interesting. Fist of Fury opens in March of 1972, goes on to smash the record set by Big Boss.
It grossed an estimated 100 million worldwide, which is the equivalent to over 600 million adjusted for inflation. And this is against the budget of $100,000.
That's just... It's like that, and I think the most famous ones of this are stuff like this and Halloween. Halloween was made for pennies, and when it was the most profitable independent film of all time, I think, until Blair Witch.
Until Blair Witch, yeah, wow.
Yeah. In the Philippines...
Which Ringo famously hated.
One of our bits. So the Philippines were also occupied by the Japanese, so they readily identified with this film's themes. It ran for 6 months of sellout theaters until the Philippine government yanked it from theaters so that domestic productions could have a fighting chance. On opening night, the rush to get to this movie caused a traffic jam that shut down the city. Incredible. Such is the power of Bruce. And this is also so cool to me. Again, because of the same themes, this film became hugely popular in Australia among the indigenous peoples of that country, because of course they can emphasize with a foreign occupying force coming in and marginalizing the shit out of them. So, just last year, Fist of Fury became the first ever movie to be dubbed into Noongar Da, which is the indigenous language of peoples from the southwest corner of Western Australia, an rapidly disappearing dialect. And because of this movie's importance and historical resonance for these people, they decided to make it the first one that would be dubbed into that dialect. That fucking whips. This movie casts a very long shadow in martial arts cinema. I mentioned Jackie Chan got his start as what they called the Bruce-sploitation genre, where after his sudden death, they just flooded the zone with a bunch of copycats just to try and fool foreign audiences. And it's so funny because the starring guys' names like Bruce Lee L.I. and Bruce Lee L.E., just to try and trick people. And Jackie Chan's first starring role is a movie called New Fist of Fury. Very similar. And this is where it's interesting about this character Chen Zhen that Bruce plays in Fist of Fury. This character becomes such a resonant folk hero in Chinese cinema that they just decide to take this character and start remaking these movies or dropping him into new situations. This is not without precedent. There is a famous historical martial artist named Wong Fei Hung, who has been the subject of 120 separate martial arts films in which he is portrayed as different actors and just kind of placed into these new scenarios and settings. There's one guy named Quan Tak Hing who starred as Wong in over 70 separate movies, which is that a record for someone playing the same character the most amount of times?
Oh, it has to. Well, non-animated edition, definitely. Yeah, I would have to think so.
So that character has been in many TV shows. This is such a fascinating aspect of the culture to me because they're almost like cover songs in the way that they take certain elements of this character and remix them and rearrange them. Like Jet Li and Donnie Yen, in both of their versions, they're wearing sort of tributes, similar shirts to what they call the Mao suit that Bruce is wearing in the film. I don't know. I think that's interesting. And to American audiences, two of the biggest video game franchises, fighting game franchises of all time, have distinct Bruce Lee ripoffs in them. Liu Kang in Mortal Kombat, the noises he makes, everything directly related to Bruce. And in Tekken, there's a character named Martial Law, which is a great pun, who's just Bruce Lee. His move set is all motion cap of Bruce Lee moves. All of his like skins, the costumes the character has in the game are all different stuff that Bruce Lee wore in movies. He makes all the same noises. It's just incredible. And of course, now we must come to Quentin Tarantino.
Did his hero dirty.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Before Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Kill Bill series is just this love letter to the Shaw Brothers Golden Harvest era of cinema. And there are so many specific nods to Bruce in there. We mentioned the 1-inch punch, which it becomes a crucial plot point. The yellow jumpsuit that Uma Thurman is wearing at the end of the first film is a ripoff of the one that Bruce is wearing in Game of Death, which is his famously unfinished movie, which you may have seen where he's fighting Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the one clip.
And that's the one where they have Bruce Lee's character fake his own death so they could include actual footage of the real Bruce Lee's open casket funeral.
Yeah.
The Bruce-ploitation is real. It got to that level.
That ain't great. And I just thought of something else just off the fly. When she's approaching the Crazy 88's headquarters on the motorcycle, they are playing Al Hirsch's
The Hornet.
Flight of the Bumblebee, the theme song to the fucking Green Hornet.
Yeah.
Then
Wow.
the final fight in that movie where she fights Lucy Liu on the rooftop of that bar. Beautiful, beautiful scene. It's snowing. And I was just rewatching scenes from Fist of Fury last night, and I had this Proustian sense memory because they're in this beautiful Zen garden set, and you hear this sound effect in the background, which is this, it's like a common thing, or maybe it's not common, I don't know. It's in Japanese, like Zen gardens. It's this mechanism you put in a waterfall, and it slowly fills up with water and then releases all of it when it gets to a certain point. I guess it's to control the flow or the levels of the water, whatever. The Lucy Liu Uma fight is in that same set from Fist of Fury with that same water fountain thing making the same noises in crucial pauses during the fight scene. The only difference is that it's snowing. It's just, it baffles me, man. And just a very quick sidebar about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Lee was not a saint. His son Brandon and Linda have both talked about him being very quick to temper and obviously just wanted to fight the entire world at various points in his life. And so it's understandable why he would be a convenient plot point for that movie, because he was in the intersection of all of those scenes. But to reduce him to this like arrogant buffoon who loses a fight.
Yeah, talk more about what the scene is in Once
Right.
Upon a
So the
Time in
scene is
Hollywood.
famously a flashback that Cliff Booth, Brad Pitt's character, is having to when he lost his job as a stuntman on a film. He's backstage shooting the shit, and Bruce Lee shows up because Bruce Lee has been in this Hollywood circle at this time, and they have like a little impromptu fight, which it must be said is one of the funnier parts of the movie because when they square off and Lee's doing the wah, and Brad Pitt just goes, ah. So that is funny. But, it's just they make him lose. He gets thrown into a car and dents the car. And I think it's the stunt coordinator's car. And that's why Cliff gets fired. But, he's played as
It's a bad look.
And it pissed everyone off, at least Bruce Lee fans, I'll just say it, including Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was so moved to anger by it that he wrote an open letter to Quentin Tarantino in, I think, Hollywood or Reporter or Variety, decrying that depiction. So, I think it's so grating to me because I don't give a shit that he wants to do this later period thing of his where he just goes into historical eras and rewrites history. You want to get Hitler machine gunned? Fine. Rules.
What's the Manson family? Cool.
Yeah, you want them flamethrowered and mauled by a giant dog. Also, my other favorite line from that movie when he's like, what did you say your name was again? Rex? And he's like, I'm the devil and I'm here to do the devil's work. He says, no, it's stupider than that.
Yeah, it's a lot dumber than that.
Yeah, you want to get them mauled to death by pit bulls? Fine. Rules. But don't go into someone's actual life who you have already pillaged and looted for your own art and make him into a cartoon. Don't do that, man. Anyway, the reason that Fist of Fury is interesting to me is this is the kind of last stop of Bruce as a regional genre icon and into an international star. Enter the Dragon, it's based on the tremendous success of these two movies that Warner Brothers approaches him after he's formed his own production company to make Enter the Dragon, which is a joint production between Lee's production company, I think Golden Harvest, and Warner Brothers. And that is the movie that it's ground zero for the kung fu craze in the States in the 70s, like kung fu fighting, all of the blaxploitation stuff that tips into kung fu crazes. Fun fact, did you know that nunchucks were outlawed in New York City around this time because gang members were carrying them and beating the shit out of people with nunchucks? So you can't have nunchucks in New York because of the directly related to Bruce Lee and the kung fu movie craze.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and so by some estimation, I mean, Enter the Dragon is bar none the most famous martial arts movie of all time. And it's truly cool because it is a truly international production. It has John Saxon, who would go on to be in, I think, Nightmare on Elm Street, a bunch of other genre stuff. John Saxon is in there. Jim Kelly, who becomes a blaxploitation star, is in that movie. It's got that tremendous Lalo Schifrin soundtrack. It is so f***ing cool. And that movie has grossed what they think is an adjusted $2 billion off a budget of $850,000. So if nothing else, Lee has financial ROI records for movie making that are just bananas. Yeah, man. And that's when he becomes an icon and this larger than life figure and, one of the greatest. He's a GOAT, the greatest of all time, man. What else do you say about Bruce? All right. I talked about that for 10 minutes straight. Uninterrupted monologue. Did you want to weigh in on anything about the 70s, the kung fu exploitation? Does that edge into your sense of awareness?
Not really.
Okay.
The closest that I get to the 70s martial arts craze, aside from Elvis, which I want to save for our
Graceland.
Yes, our Baz Luhrmann-centric piece on Elvis and his Graceland home. But other than that, it really only extends to like everybody was kung fu fighting.
Yeah.
But you are far more of an expert on this than I am.
I mean, what else do you say about someone? He is like Clint Eastwood, in just being this genre influence. I don't even know who the corollary would be for horror. Somebody like Christopher Lee. Just bringing these genre films across borders and making them these enormous, enormous successes with all of these resonances in culture, every aspect of culture. Yeah, man. I mean, I'm not going to talk anymore. I feel like I'm literally going hoarse with my love of Bruce Lee. So I would just say, even if you don't feel like you want to do the full length thing, just go to YouTube and poke around, look at some Bruce Lee stuff. And I hope we've been able to make the case for his enduring legacy. And yeah, man, have fun looking him up. It's cool stuff. He's a tremendous guy.
Yeah, I have zero background in martial arts whatsoever, but even someone like me is able to appreciate the incredible grace and power and artistry of this man, and also his wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we mentioned this earlier. His writings are so fascinating and beautiful and poetic and insightful. There was a book published posthumously in 1975 that was nominally his philosophy on his fighting technique, but really it touches on all aspects of life. I mean, wow, such a fascinating polymath with really pretty stunning insights on just how to live, you know?
Well,
he did a lot in those 32 years.
Yeah, he did.
That's right. Bruce Lee was younger than we are.
I feel like I just got 1 inch punched. Well, folks, thank you for listening. This has been Too Much Information. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh. We'll catch you next time. Too Much Information was a production of iHeartRadio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The supervising producer is Mike Johns.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
With original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.